Hey guys, we're here with another Foundations video where we're going to continue talking about building worship sets. And if you haven't watched our first video on this topic, I'd encourage you to pause the video right now, go check that out. In that first video, we really zoom in to choosing worship songs that are contextualized for your context and your people. So go watch that. And then in this video, we're going to pick up at arranging your order of worship, choosing song keys, working through transitions, and putting the whole thing together. The first thing you want to do is organize and arrange your order of worship. And there's a lot of elements that could comprise your order of worship. Obviously, you've got songs, you've got the message, the teaching of God's word. There could be a host moment or announcements, some type of vision casting, directive moment. A lot of times we'll put in response worship. Sometimes we have communion or baptisms. There's a lot that could go into any given order of worship. And before you start plugging anything in, you need to identify exactly what you're working with on that given week. After you started thinking about that, you need to identify what is flexible and what's not. So a couple examples of things that aren't flexible are the message and the song before the message. So as we said in our previous video, the message is generally the element that everything else is centered around. It's the thing everything before it is pointing to and the things that every element after it are building off of. So the message is unchanging. The song before it is less flexible than the others because you really want to nail the theme going into the message, and you want to make sure that transition of thought is good and strong. So those two things typically are less flexible. A couple elements that are flexible that you've got a little bit more room for creativity are speaking moments. Where are you going to put your call to worship? What is your call to worship going to be about? Any speaking that you have within a song is up to you and left to your discretion. Maybe the keys that you sing in, you've got a pretty good range vocally, and so you can sing in any number of keys. That's left up to you to decide. Is a guy going to sing that song? Is a girl going to sing that song? The arrangements of a song, looking at the song sequence. And these are all elements that, for the most part, are left up to you to decide. And as you start to arrange your order of worship, you can be creative in how you arrange these and what you choose. The next thing you can ask is there any specific element that I need to include? Maybe your pastor has requested that you play a certain song. Maybe there's a speaking part, a speaking moment or topic that you know that you want to get in front of people and you want to talk through, you want to teach. Maybe there's a new song that you want to reinforce a couple weeks in a row. Sometimes it's helpful just to identify, what do I need to put in here? And then that can be a good starting point for you to get the wheels going and get you started down the road creatively. An example of a common order of worship at our church is typically 4 or 5 songs up front, a host or directive moment sprinkled somewhere in the middle, and then the message. Sometimes we'll have response worship afterwards, but typically worship up front, a host moment, generally after song 1, song 2, sometimes song 3, but worship, then a message. The next thing you want to do is start plugging songs and elements into your order of worship. And this is the first time that you start to think about transitions. And hopefully in this moment, you're going to start thinking about how elements and songs transition in and out of one another. And these transitions are mostly going to happen on 2 main fronts. The first, and the one that's often overlooked, is your transition of thought. And in this moment, you want to start to think about how ideas and how concepts flow in and out of one another in a way that makes sense and builds upon the previous element. The other main front is musically. And thinking musically, this is a moment where a song pool can be tremendously helpful to you. You may remember in our previous video about building a set, we talked about making a 25 to 30 song pool that you are typically going to pull from whenever you're building sets. If you include the keys you're typically drawing from in your song pool, it can be really easy for you to start thinking about how elements fit together because you already know what your options are from a key standpoint for your given songs. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of Nashville numbers, I'd encourage you to go check out our video where we talk about the concept and how it can be valuable to you as a worship leader. If you are familiar, then you know that the 4th and the 5th chords in any given key are major chords. And it's very natural and pleasant for you to transition to keys that correspond to these chords. An example of this could be if I'm in the key of G, I could transition very naturally to the key of C or the key of D because these correspond to the 4th and the 5th chord in the key of G. And so as you start to think about songs that fit well together and how you can transition well musically, think about related keys. Obviously, whenever you transition from one song to another, the best, most seamless transition would be 2 keys that are the same next to each other. Related keys are the next best thing. They're very easy, they're very natural transitions musically. Some big picture questions that you can ask as you start to arrange your set could be, where can you add speaking moments? As we've already said, most of the speaking moments, from the content of your call to worship to speaking within a song to even the placement of where you speak, is mostly left to your discretion. So thinking about where can you add speaking moments, even in the context of transitions, can really help you. If you have a bad transition musically, sometimes that could be a good moment for you to put in a call to worship or put a speaking moment as a way kind of to transition well and cover what would be musically maybe not the most ideal transition. Arrangements of songs typically are something that you can control and you can manipulate to best fit and best flow between ideas. Placement of a new song is something that's really important. Typically, you don't want to start or end a set with a new song. Generally, you want people's engagement to be high at the beginning as you bring them into worship. And then the song, as we've already said, right before the sermon, you really want to nail thematically, and you really want people's engagement to be good going into the teaching and as they receive the teaching of God's Word. Thinking about new songs, maybe you want to play a new song multiple weeks in a row. If it is the first time you've played a new song, maybe that's a good moment to put a call to worship or some type of teaching moment before the very first time you've played a new song so you can teach it. Maybe you want to do a couple choruses, a couple bridges of this song, just so people can start to build familiarity with the idea and the song. You might also want to think about the number of male versus the number of female-led songs. You want to make sure that both male and female in your audience are represented in the songs. You want to make sure that your set flows well, that it's not too choppy. As you start to arrange elements, sometimes you don't have a choice, sometimes there are things you have to include, but sometimes you can manipulate certain things so that it's not too much starting, stopping, singing, not singing. Sometimes this might even look like the congregation standing for a song and sitting for announcements, and standing for a song and sitting for a video, and standing again and then sitting for the sermon. So thinking about how this actually flows together can be really, really helpful to you. Are there too many breaks within your set, as we just talked about? Maybe a good goal for you is to have at least one musical transition between songs, just to keep a little bit of that flow going and that momentum as you move forward. Another good rule of thumb is whoever gives a call to worship almost always should lead the very next song. It's very natural for the person who just led in this directive moment in this call to worship to then lead the congregation in the very next bit of singing. We're now going to look at what it looks like for you to build a set from the ground up and put all this into practice. All right, so now let's look at what it might look like for us to do this whole process, start to finish, until we have arrived at a completed, finished worship set. At the very bottom, I've put a little sticky note with some reminders from our first video, as well as I threw in some keys, the guy key first and then the girl key next in parentheses for the songs that we identified that really nailed the theme from our first video. So now jumping into putting this whole thing together, let's look at step 1, which is identify and arrange your order of worship. Let's imagine, for the purpose of this example, that we are at a youth event and that the order of worship of songs 1 through 3 and then a message is their standard week-to-week, fixed, unchanging order of worship. So as we talked about before, this would be considered obviously something that is not flexible. But remember, we have quite a few things that are flexible and left to our discretion, so we'll keep those in mind as we continue on and we start putting things together and thinking through transitions and arrangements and speaking moments. Moving now to step 2, let's start plugging in songs. Again, for this example, we're in a youth context. So imagine that for this example, I want to start with high energy or high tempo. I realized very quickly over at our sticky note that none of these songs that we've identified are particularly high in tempo or BPM. So I realized very quickly that I might need to add to our song pool. A couple songs that quickly come to mind are There's Nothing That Our God Can't Do, which I know a girl could sing in the key of D, a guy in the key of G, and then my second song I might think of Great Things, where a girl could sing in the key of D or E, and a guy could sing in G or A. As I quickly think about those two songs and I look at these four over here in the bottom right corner of our screen, I realize that musically, it doesn't matter which of these two songs I pick because there's enough related keys between these 6 songs that I can make anything work. Anything can work well. So musically, I'm not too concerned. But as I look at the transition of thought category that we talked about before, I realize that there's nothing that our God can't do actually fits a lot better because it's really going to hone in on this idea of the power of Jesus. And this fits very well with where we're going with our morning and some of these major themes we've identified. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in "There's Nothing That Our God Can't Do" first. Awesome. Okay, so now as I think about what song could follow this, once again, musically, I know that any of these songs can fit because we have either the same key or related key available to us for any song that we wanted to choose next. So I'm really, once again, really looking at this transition of thought idea, and I really like "What a Beautiful Name" next because as we were thinking about the power of Jesus, chorus 3 of "What a Beautiful Name," what a powerful name it is, the name of Jesus. I really like this, continue to build on this idea as we move closer to our sermon. Okay, so song 3 now. This is the song where I really want to nail our theme. And of the songs remaining, I really like "Tremble" for how well it fits thematically. I mean, we've been walking through the power of Jesus through our first 2 songs, and then it feels like "Tremble" really zooms in on the power of Jesus over darkness, the power of Jesus to overcome darkness, which is a major theme and fits very well with where we're going with our sermon. So I'm going to go ahead and add in "Tremble" next. So as I quickly overview our set, I see that our first 2 songs fit really well musically. They fit really well in our transition of thought. They are good, relevant songs. I'm starting with the higher tempo that I wanted to. But as I look at our third song, I realize that this is kind of a clunky transition. To go from the key of D to the key of B isn't great. And so what works here really well is this is also a moment of kind of transition within our set where we've been moving toward the power of Jesus and really hitting that idea pretty heavily in the first 2 songs. And then there's kind of this transition for song 3 where we go from power of Jesus and we zoom into light over darkness. So I'd actually really like to put in a call to worship right before song 3 so that I can really bring home this idea. Maybe I'll read a verse about light over darkness, or read a verse about the power of Jesus. Maybe I'll highlight some lyrics that are to come within "Tremble." In any scenario, a call to worship here feels really appropriate. Now I've got a couple options here as far as what to do next. So I've got my call to worship here, which we feel good about. You remember earlier in this video we talked about the one giving the call to worship it's most natural for them to be the one to actually lead through the next song because the one setting up the song, leading the next song feels very natural and flows very well. So I can either have our female worship leader deliver and walk through this call to worship and then lead the song in B. But for the example that we're giving right now, let's imagine that I was going to give this call to worship, and so we would need to adjust "Tremble" to go from the key of B, which is female-led, to either, as we see here in a sticky note, either D or E to make it a male-led song. And we're in luck because song 2 is in D, so we can actually adjust this to the key of D. And now this actually went from a clunky transition to transitioning very well because we're just going to stay in the key of D, and our keys player could play underneath my call to worship, and this would be as seamless as they come, thinking about transitions. So right now I could stop. We could end right here, and this would be a good set. But I'm really zooming in once again on our call to worship, and I'm thinking about "Tremble," and I'm thinking about how we can best accent and highlight this moment where our call to worship is set it up. We've highlighted some lyrics. As I look at arrangements, I think our first two songs are good as they are. So we'll keep the normal arrangements or the arrangements that we have right now in Planning Center. When I look at Tremble, though, I actually want to adjust it slightly. So I'm going to go here. I don't want to start with the intros. Instead, I would rather start with the bridge. So, link to this item only. I'm going to throw that in, and we will accept that change. I like this because we're going to start with your name is a light, the shadows can't deny, your name cannot be overcome. Starting with these lyrics would feel like a very powerful and logical first lyric to sing of this song after we've spent a call to worship transitioning us and setting us up to sing those lyrics. It feels very natural for us to do that. So this song, this set feels pretty good. I think this is the moment where we will stop and we'll call it good. I hope that this was helpful to you in thinking through not only just putting songs in and thinking about musically how they transition, but also thinking through the transition of thought, looking at the songs that fit well thematically, looking at keys that correspond and transition well through one another, and then at the end adjusting arrangements to best highlight and best capitalize on the journey that you're walking people through as you go from song 1 to song 3, and then your message in this example over John 1 through 5. If you have any questions or thoughts about this video or this example or any of these songs, please feel free to email us at worship@grace-bible.org. We will see you next time.